Let's do some philosophy. Today we're going to look at a YouTube short that comes from a YouTube channel. That YouTube channel is called The Daily Dose of Wisdom, and the creator behind that channel is a gentleman named Brandon McGuire. This video is particularly interesting to me for a few reasons. One, it is one of many videos out there that claim to own or destroy or drop the mic or annihilate an argument, meaning they prove the other argument wrong. Prove it. With certainty, there's no point in continuing. And we're always interested in that in philosophy because then we don't have to bother with that argument ever again. So I'm looking forward to seeing if that actually happens. Second, I get a lot of Brandon's stuff in my feed. I think it's likely because it has the word wisdom in it, and I'm always up for some wisdom. Lastly, I really want to take a look at this video because of something that is in Brandon's bio. He more or less says he welcomes conversation and loves to hear from the skeptic, and looks like he's a pretty loving, caring guy. The one qualifier I want to throw in here is, you have no idea if I'm a skeptic or not, and you shouldn't care, because I'm not trying to prove or disprove the existence of God. I'm just using logic, using reason to see whether or not this argument actually annihilates the atheist position as Brandon claims it does. So let's take a look at the video and go from there.
One of the all-time great mic drop endings.
When you say extraordinary, really what you're saying is no amount of evidence would convince me of these extraordinary claims.
Sure it would. If tomorrow morning, immediately after breakfast, suddenly there was an earthquake, and a silvery light shone in the sky, and the leaves dropped from the trees, and I dashed outside, and there, towering over us like 100 Everests, was this giant figure with lightning playing around his Michelangeloid face, and he pointed down and saying, "Be assured, Keith M. Parsons, that I do in fact exist, and I'm sick of your logic chopping." Dr. Craig, I would join you in the pew of the church, in the front pew of the church the next Sunday.
Be going to the question and answer period. We're going to go to the question and answer period, so be going to the microphone as we wind this down.
You don't think that you would have said, "Boy, I was having a hallucination."
Now, the final nail in the coffin here is that Dawkins actually says that he thinks he would be hallucinating in that exact same scenario.
If we're going to determine whether or not this is an all-time great mic drop ending, putting this atheist objection to bed forever, then we got to examine the argument first. Craig starts things off in the beginning of the clip by challenging Parsons in a way, basically saying, hey, look, it seems like there's absolutely zero evidence you would ever accept for the existence of God. And this is problematic to Parsons' position for two reasons. One, if Parsons were to say, there is no evidence, nothing you could ever say or do, nothing that could ever happen to me would ever convince me that God exists, Craig would have every right to just say, well, now you're just being stubborn and closed-minded, and there's no point in us having a discussion. The second problem is, it undermines Parsons' kind of scientific approach to the world. If he's really going to claim that he follows the evidence and is objective and just believes whatever the evidence tells him, then he's got to come up with some conception of evidence that could prove the existence of God, or his claims are completely false, empty, hollow, and he's basically saying, yeah, I'm a scientist and I follow the evidence, except when it leads me to something I disagree with. So Parsons' response is, let me tell you the evidence that I would accept. And he goes into great detail with regard to the after breakfast, the giant, 100 times taller than Everest, Michelangeloid, that's got to be Jason Momoa. Jason Momoa, giant Jason Momoa, 100 times bigger than Mount Everest, lightning around his head, saying, hey, I exist. So Parsons says, if that happened, then I would believe. That's adequate evidence for me to believe in the existence of God. And this is where Brandon's mic drop moment happens. Craig says, are you sure you wouldn't think you were hallucinating? And everybody laughs, ha 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 ha, because Craig's referring back to a point that Parsons made in his original argument. He was referring to 1 Corinthians, where Paul claims that Jesus appeared to 500 brethren simultaneously. Parsons dismisses that as if they might have had a mass hallucination. Here's the clip.
How do we know that the 500, if they really existed, did not suffer a mass hallucination?
Parsons' argument here is a really popular one. He's basically giving a simplified version of a really, really famous argument that David Hume gives in a chapter of his inquiry concerning human understanding called Of Miracles. Basically, what Parsons is saying, and what Hume said, is if I'm given testimony, it always makes sense for me to question whether or not what someone's testifying happened is more likely than they're lying, being mistaken, or in this case, hallucinating. And what Parsons is saying is it seems far more likely that there was a mass hallucination than there was an actual appearance of Jesus to 500 brethren simultaneously. And this is why Craig's joke works, because he's saying, ha 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 ha, are you sure you wouldn't be hallucinating too? But Parsons has a response. And Brandon cuts the video just before we get to see it. So let's take a look.
Well, then,
yes, but,
but that's the thing. I'm assuming this is
what
something.
About 500
I'm assuming
brethren?
This is 500 brethren,
you appeal to multiple.
I'm assuming, that it's on the evening news, that everybody on the earth goes out to see it.
So now we can see how Parsons is responding. He's wanting to objectively apply the principle, hey, is it more likely that someone's mistaken, lying, or hallucinating than the crazy miraculous thing happened? And he's going to be consistent by applying it even to himself. And that's really what Craig's asking him to do when he says, are you sure you wouldn't be hallucinating? And Parsons' response makes sense. He'd say, heck yeah, I'd assume I was hallucinating, until I saw that everybody on the planet had also seen it. There'd be news stories, everybody'd be reporting about it, everybody in the world would have seen it as well. So, with that bulk of testimony, with all of those people seeing it, as well as himself seeing it, it becomes more likely that giant Jason Momoa appeared than that he was hallucinating. Interestingly, this also covers the little Dawkins snippet that Brandon gives at the end.
Now, the final nail in the coffin here is that Dawkins actually says that he thinks he would be hallucinating in that exact same scenario.
Now, I don't read a lot of Richard Dawkins, but it doesn't take a lot of work to make sense of what he would be saying. And I can imagine him saying one of two things. One, hey, of course I would question whether or not I was hallucinating at first, and then if there was a bulk of evidence of the sort Parsons describes, then I would have to believe that God existed. Or Dawkins could double down. He could say, hey, even if it was on every news story, even if every war in the world stopped, even if I saw it on YouTube, even if I saw 10 million videos from people's phones of this giant Jason Momoa, I'd believe none of it because I would think all of it was a hallucination because it would be so absurd to me. But that's a separate argument, and that's not the one we're talking about here. In conclusion, is this a mic drop moment? Is this an annihilation of an atheist position? Absolutely not, just on purely logical grounds, because the atheist has the response, of course I would think I was hallucinating at first, until the bulk of the evidence became so huge, so compelling, that it was more likely that God existed than that I was hallucinating. There is one really important thing we can learn from this video. That if we're going to do philosophy well or approach philosophical questions well, we have to really fairly, honestly, and generously consider all arguments. Then we can use our tools of logic and evidence to dismiss them. If we're just going to kind of cherry pick or examine straw men or just half-ass the opposing viewpoint in order to take it down, we aren't going to find much truth. We aren't going to find much knowledge. And we sure as hell aren't going to find much wisdom. If you have questions, comments, concerns, and want to have a civil discussion about this, or can think of a topic you'd like me to examine philosophically in the future, let me know in the comments. Thank you for the time. Bye.